2 days, that was all the peace I got after my daughter's wedding. Just 48 hours of pretending life was settling into a new, hopeful chapter before everything turned sour. On the second evening, my brand new son-in-law darkened my doorstep, not alone, but flanked by a notary who clutched a leather folder like a weapon. Philip didn't even bother with pleasantries. His smug smile practically oozed entitlement as he said, "We just sold this house. You'll be moving to a retirement home." He leaned against the doorframe as though victory was already his. Like the old man before him, me had finally been cornered. I stared at him for a long moment, my pulse steady, my breath slow. He expected outrage, but I wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. Instead, I folded my arms, let a calm smile play at my lips, and answered, "Great. Let's stop by the police station first. They're very interested in what I sent them about you." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the door, but I watched that arrogant grin falter just enough to tell me the game had changed. It hadn't begun here, though. No, this battle was seeded earlier, at a dinner I'll never forget. The night after the wedding, while the flowers from the ceremony still clung to life, their petals already curling at the edges, we'd sat together in a dimly lit booth at Golden Oaks, a cozy restaurant that suddenly felt more like a courtroom. Preston, my daughter Lillian, and Philip, her brand new husband, joined me for what was supposed to be a celebratory meal. The clinking glasses, laughter from nearby tables, and the faint notes of the piano player in the corner were supposed to frame joy. Instead, Philip leaned forward, his wine glass catching the candlelight, and dropped a bomb that made the champagne in my throat taste like vinegar. "Lillian and I need our own place to start our family properly," he said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough charm to sound rehearsed. Then, as though rehearsed even further, he added, "Your house would be perfect for a young couple." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. My fork slipped against the plate, the last bite of wedding cake I'd been savoring turning bitter on my tongue. I stared at him, my hands tightening against the edge of the table, my mind replaying the image of that house, my house, the walls I had raised with my own hands 20 years ago, the garden I had nursed season after season, the rooms where Lillian had taken her first steps, where her laughter had filled the air, all of it reduced to nothing more than a bargaining chip in Philip's eyes. "That's my home," I said finally, my voice calm but firm, though I could feel the pressure building beneath the words. "I built it with my own hands." Lillian shifted between us, her wedding ring glinting in the candlelight as she twisted her fingers nervously. The booth suddenly felt too tight, the air thick enough to choke on. Around us, other diners laughed and clinked glasses, oblivious to the storm raging at our table. "But you're just one person in such a large house," Philip replied, his smile fixed, unbothered, like he was speaking to a stubborn child. "It's not practical. And at your age, wouldn't you prefer something more manageable?" "At my age, 68, he said it as though I had one foot in the grave already, as though I was a relic being asked to step aside. My champagne flute trembled in my hand, but I refused to let it drop. "We'd take such good care of it," he went on, reaching across the table to squeeze Lillian's hand. His eyes softened for her, but when they flicked back to me, they held a quiet calculation. "Think about it, your grandchildren playing in those rooms someday." Lillian's eyes darted nervously between us. "Dad, Philip, please don't fight. This is supposed to be a happy day." Happy. The word sliced through me like glass. I had written a $15,000 check for their reception just days ago. The flowers on the table still held the scent of roses from that very ceremony. And now here we were, speaking of tearing apart the foundation of my life. I set my glass down, straightened in my seat, and met Philip's gaze without flinching. "At my age," I said slowly, "I'm still strong enough to make my own decisions about my property. You can stay at the house for a few days while you find your own place. But that's it." For the first time, I saw the mask slip. His confident smile flickered, and behind it, just for a moment, something cold and dangerous flashed in his eyes. Then, just as quickly, the charming facade returned. But I had seen it, and I knew right then, this was only the beginning. "Of course, Preston, I understand completely. Philip's words were dipped in honey, but his tone had sharpened just enough to reveal the steel underneath. He gave a practiced sigh, tilting his head toward Lillian, as though I were the unreasonable one at the table. It's just rental prices these days, and with Lillian's teaching salary, his hand covered hers, squeezing it gently for effect. We'll manage, honey. Lillian forced a small smile, but I heard the crack in her voice before I saw it in her eyes. My daughter had always struggled with money. She never complained, but I knew the debt from student loans, the modest paycheck from her school job. She carried it quietly, the way her mother used to. Now here she was, caught between the father who raised her and the husband who wanted to strip away the foundation under her feet. I caught the faintest tightening of Philip's jaw, a subtle tick betraying his frustration. He pressed on, his voice smooth as polished glass. I was hoping we could discuss this as family. After all, what's the point of holding on to such a valuable asset when it could benefit all of us? Valuable asset. That phrase stuck to my ribs like poison. My home, my sanctuary reduced to a line on a ledger. I wasn't hearing about a house. Not to me. I was hearing about the front porch, where Margaret and I had posed for our first photo as husband and wife. The living room where Lillian had taken her very first steps, wobbling toward me, as Margaret cried with laughter. The bedroom where I had carried Margaret across the threshold on our wedding night. The quiet corner where I had held her hand as she drew her final breaths. And now, in Philip's mouth, all of that became an asset. The background jazz, once soothing, turned cruel in my ears. The notes from the piano mocked me. Around us, couples leaned in close, sharing smiles, secrets and laughter, while mine, the family I had built and protected, was unraveling thread by thread. A waiter drifted by, pouring water with perfect indifference, as if trained not to notice the small tragedies unfolding at every table. His presence barely registered against the fire building in my chest. The answer is no, I said, my voice low but cutting. Each word dropped heavier than the last, like stones breaking the surface of a pond. Find your own place. For the first time, Philip's smile faltered. He leaned back in his chair, lips still curled, but stiff, brittle. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and when he spoke, the charm was a thin mask stretched over irritation. Well, we can certainly discuss it more, when emotions aren't running quite so high. Emotions. He made it sound as though my refusal was irrational, as though wanting to keep the house I had poured my life into was nothing more than an old man's foolish sentimentality. Across the table, Lillian's face crumpled, her voice soft, pleading. Maybe we should just go home. Home. The word cut deep. She meant my house, the place they had been occupying since their honeymoon, where Philip had already begun prowling like a vulture. He'd been asking about the heating system, about property taxes, about neighborhood values, as though testing the soil before planting his flag. Something inside me snapped. I pushed back from the table, the legs of my chair scraping the hardwood with a screech that turned a few heads nearby. My napkin slipped from my lap and crumpled on the floor, but I didn't bother to pick it up. My vision tunneled, the laughter and music of the restaurant fading into a dull roar as blood thundered in my ears. Preston. Wait. Lillian half rose, her hand reaching toward me, but I was already standing, pulling my wallet from my jacket with trembling fingers. Two $20 bills slapped against the polished wood of the table, sharper and louder than I intended. Take care of the check, I managed, my voice tight with fury. I couldn't mask. I need some air. Behind me, Philip's voice floated through the warm, suffocating air of the restaurant, calm and measured, almost amused. We'll talk about this later, Preston, when you've had time to think it through properly. I didn't turn back. The warmth of the room pressed against me like a hand trying to hold me in place, but I forced my way toward the exit. The maître d' offered me a polite nod, unaware that my world had just been split open in that booth. The door swung shut behind me, and March's cold air slapped my face with the sting of reality. My breath plumed white, mingling with the night as I fumbled for my car keys, my hands shaking, not just from the chill,
but from the betrayal gnawing at my chest. I wasn't just stepping into the cold, I was stepping into war.
The drive home was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that sits heavy on your shoulders and refuses to let go. Lillian sat in the back seat, her eyes flicking up to the rearview mirror every few seconds, searching my face as though she might find answers written there. Each glance burned into me, stoking a guilt I didn't want to carry but couldn't shake. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, staring at the lines of the road as though they might steady me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my tie had become a noose around my throat. Inside, the familiar walls closed around me like an embrace. My home, greeted me with the comfort Philip could never understand. I loosened the silk knot at my collar, tossed it onto the counter, and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey. Neat. The amber liquid caught the lamplight like liquid fire, and I swallowed half in one go, the burn searing a path down to my chest. The study welcomed me like an old friend. My leather chair, molded to my shape after years of use, let me sink into it with a tired grunt. The bookshelves, lined with 4 decades of carefully chosen volumes, looked down on me like silent witnesses, and on the desk, tucked into the corner where I could see her every time I sat here, Margaret's photo smiled out at me. Her eyes had that same warmth they always did, the kind that used to ground me when the world spun too fast. I looked out the window, the street lamps casting their pale light across the yard in long geometric patterns. My yard, my house. And yet Philip had stood there in that restaurant, talking about it like it was just another transaction, a chip to be cashed in. The audacity still stole my breath. $15,000. That's what I had written without hesitation. The check I handed over so my daughter could have the wedding of her dreams. The Golden Oaks reception hall. The string quartet. Floral arrangements extravagant enough to outshine some people's cars. I had done it gladly, my chest swelling when I saw Lillian's eyes light up at the sight of it all. I'd wanted her to have her perfect day. And now, 2 days later, her husband wanted the house too. I unlocked my phone, thumbing through the wedding photos. There was Philip, smiling as he guided Lillian's hand over the knife to cut the cake. Philip, spinning her across the dance floor while she laughed, her head thrown back in joy. Philip, shaking my hand at the end of the night, calling me Dad for the very first time. The whiskey scorched my throat again as I stared at his smile. Had he been planning this even then? Was every toast, every handshake, every grin just another move in a game I hadn't realized I was playing? I reached for the desk drawer and pulled out the leather-bound journal Margaret had given me when I retired from engineering. For all those ideas rattling around in your head, she had said with that little smirk of hers. I flipped to a blank page, uncapped my pen, and carefully wrote, March 2025. Philip Green made demand for house ownership during wedding celebration dinner. Claims practical concerns. Mentions my age repeatedly. Lillian uncomfortable but supportive of husband. The pen felt heavier with each word. My hand shook as I pressed the ink into paper, rage tempered only by a determination to record every detail. What kind of man does that? I thought. 2 days after a wedding I paid for. Not a discussion. Not an offer to buy. A demand. As if I were some doddering old fool, ready to shuffle off to a retirement home without a fight. I set the pen down and walked to the window. The street looked so peaceful. Deceptively so. Porch lights glowed warmly. Televisions flickered behind curtains. Families went about their evenings in normal houses, living normal lives. None of them had a son-in-law who spoke about valuable assets while wedding cake still lingered on the tongue. I turned back to my desk, opening my laptop. Bank statements, property records, insurance documents, numbers that represented 40 years of sweat, discipline and careful planning. The house was worth at least $400,000, maybe more with the way the market had climbed. My pension and savings could stretch another 20 years comfortably, 30 if I tightened my belt. And yet Philip had known all this, somehow. I thought back. During the engagement he had asked questions that seemed innocent then. What's your property tax situation like, Preston?
This neighborhood must have great appreciation rates, huh? Ever think about what you'll do with all this space one day? I had answered honestly, even proudly, eager to show him that Lillian came from a stable, secure family. Now those questions tasted different. Reconnaissance. That's what they had been. Margaret's photo caught the lamplight again, her eyes seeming to fix on mine. What would she say now? She had always been better at reading people, quicker to sense the shadows behind the smiles. Trust but verify, she used to tell me. People show you who they are if you pay attention. I hadn't paid enough attention. I'd been too happy about Lillian's engagement, too grateful she had found someone after the heartbreak of her divorce 3 years ago, too relieved to see her laughing again. I flipped open the journal once more and pressed pen to paper. Philip Green, 38 years old, business consultant, claims to help small companies improve efficiency, works from home, travels occasionally for clients, never names specific companies, never provides details. The more I wrote, the more questions piled up. What does he actually do? Where does the money come from? How does a man who claims modest earnings afford a 2-carat engagement ring worth $20,000? I closed the journal and reached for my phone. Tomorrow I would start digging. First call Edward Lloyd, my lawyer, the man who had guided me through Margaret's estate, the only one I trusted with matters this delicate. Edward understood discretion, and if there was rot in Philip's story, he'd know how to uncover it. The whiskey glass sat empty beside me when the front door creaked open Thursday afternoon. My grocery bags felt heavier than usual as I carried them in from the car, the weight pressing harder on my shoulders after 2 nights of restless sleep. Every shadow seemed longer, every sound sharper, every thought darker. I had been living in a state of siege, waiting for the next move. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw my neighbor Seal Brown straighten from his flower bed. His weathered face, etched deep with sun and years, carried a look I hadn't seen before, a mixture of urgency and worry. He brushed dirt from his hands and crossed the lawn toward me with quick, deliberate steps. "Preston," he called, his voice low and serious. "I need to tell you something important." I set the grocery bags on the hood of my car, my heart quickening. The tone in Seal's voice wasn't casual gossip. It was warning.
Seal's voice carried a weight I hadn't heard since his days on the force. His former police instincts sharpened every word, and my stomach twisted before he even finished speaking. "What's going on?" I asked, though dread already knotted in my chest. He glanced toward my front door, then back at me. "Yesterday afternoon, Philip brought someone to your house." The air went still. Someone? Business type. Suit, briefcase, and some kind of measuring device. His eyes narrowed. Didn't look casual, looked like a professional. My blood ran cold. What were they doing? "Walking the property," Seal said grimly. "Measuring things, taking photos, writing it all down in a notebook. Real thorough job." The grocery bags slipped in my hands, suddenly heavy and irrelevant. My pulse thundered in my ears. "How long?" My voice came out thinner than I intended. "About an hour, maybe longer." Philip had keys. Seal's frown deepened. "Let him inside too." "And the guy?" "He spent a lot of time in your backyard, measured the fence line, took pictures of the foundation." He held my gaze, letting the silence finish his thought. He didn't need to spell it out. He knew I understood exactly what that meant. My hands clenched into fists, the nerve of him. Seal must have seen the fire in my eyes, because his tone softened just slightly. "Figured you knew. Otherwise I would have called sooner." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "Thank you, Seal. This is very important information." I gathered the grocery bags again, my fingers trembling against the plastic handles. Very important indeed. Inside, the bags hit the kitchen counter with a thud I barely registered. My legs carried me straight to the study, my sanctuary, my command post. The computer screen glowed to life, painfully slow, every second dragging like an hourglass filled with molasses. My mind raced ahead of the loading screen, turning over every possibility, every suspicion. When the browser history finally appeared, My worst fears sharpened into reality. Wednesday afternoon, the exact time I'd been at the hardware store, the search terms glared back at me like flashing neon signs. Property appraisers, Chicago suburbs, real estate evaluation services, quick house sale companies, cash buyers, residential properties. Each one hit like a fist to the chest. I scrolled further. Legal requirements, property transfer Illinois, power of attorney, elderly homeowner assistance programs. My throat tightened. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the mouse. The visited sites were worse. Professional appraisal firms, companies promising fast cash for homes, law practices, specializing in senior property transfers. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Philip hadn't just idly wondered about the future. He had mapped out the entire process of taking my home. I leaned back, the chair groaning under my weight. My breath came slow and ragged as the truth settled like ice in my veins. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment idea blurted over wine. This was calculated, cold, predatory, a plan he had been building for months, maybe from the very beginning. I thought back to the engagement, his polite, curious questions about my finances, my retirement, my routines, questions I had answered proudly, thinking I was welcoming a son into the family. But the memory soured. He hadn't been interested. He'd been assessing me, evaluating me like a mark. My phone buzzed on the desk, jolting me from my spiral. A text from Lillian. "Dad, are you feeling better? Philip says you seemed upset at dinner. Maybe we can all talk tonight." Talk. That was Philip's way. To smooth things over with charm. To cloak his schemes in reasonable discussions. No doubt he was already armed with appraisals, legal jargon, and a well-rehearsed pitch to make me seem unreasonable if I refused. I stared at the screen, the evidence clear as daylight in front of me, and for the first time in years my hands trembled, not from age, but from fury. With deliberate care, I set the phone aside and picked up the landline. My fingers dialed a number I knew by heart. Edward Lloyd, my lawyer, the man who had handled Margaret's estate, the only person I trusted with secrets this dangerous. The line clicked. Edward Lloyd's office, a professional voice answered. "This is Sandra." I gripped the receiver harder, my voice low and steady. "Sandra, this is Preston. I need to speak to Edward. It's urgent." My hands shook as I gripped the receiver tighter, knuckles white against the cord. "Sandra, it's Preston Weaver. I need to speak with Edward immediately. It's urgent." Her voice was calm, professional. "He's with a client, Mr. Weaver. Can I have him call you back?" "No." The word cracked out sharper than I intended. I drew in a breath, steadying myself. "Tell him it's about fraud. Real estate fraud." The phrase felt alien, like I was spitting out poison. My throat tightened as I forced the rest. "Tell him my son-in-law, Philip Green, is trying to steal my house." There was a pause on the other end, longer than silence should be. Then Sandra's voice returned, more clipped, urgent. "I'll get him right away, sir. Please hold." The line filled with static. I paced the length of my study, the glow of the computer screen burning behind me like an accusation. The browser history was still open, every search term a nail in the coffin of my trust. My heart thudded hard enough to echo in my ears. "Preston." Edward's voice broke through, steadier than mine, but not without concern. "Sandra said something about fraud. About your son-in-law, Philip Green." I swallowed, my teeth grinding his name. "He's planning to take my house, Edward. I have proof. He's been researching exactly how to do it, legally." A silence fell, weighted, heavy. Edward didn't answer right away, and when he finally spoke, his tone was different. Measured, wary. "Philip Green, you said?" "Yes," I said. My voice rose with each word. "He married my daughter 2 days ago, and now he's—" "Preston, sit down." His voice dropped into something I'd never heard before, even in our worst moments after Margaret's death. "Give me a moment to check something." I heard the sharp clatter of keys, the shuffle of papers, his deliberate, methodical search.
But there was an edge to his movements, something urgent beneath the surface, the kind of sound that told me he already suspected what he'd find.
When he spoke again, his words sliced through me. I have 3 active cases involving Philip Green. The room seemed to sway. What? He specializes in real estate fraud, Edward continued, each word cold, clinical, but tinged with anger, specifically targeting elderly homeowners. His pattern is consistent. The words hit like ice water, numbing me, burning me all at once. Are you saying he's done this before? Yes. Edward's voice grew harder. He marries into families, gains trust, then uses forged documents to transfer property. Always men in their 60s or 70s. Always recently widowed, always with adult children, facing financial strain. I reached blindly for the edge of the desk, my fingers gripping wood for balance. But he just married my daughter. That's exactly the timeline, Preston. Edward cut in. He works fast. He moves before his victims can react or seek counsel. That's why you're in immediate danger. My head spun. Images of Lillian's wedding, her glowing smile, the way she'd looked at Philip with unguarded trust. It all crashed against the truth Edward had laid bare. My daughter hadn't married a man. She had married a predator. Edward's tone sharpened. Listen to me. Don't sign anything. Don't hand over any financial documents. Don't let him handle a single legal matter for you. He's been perfecting this scheme for years. The moment you give him an opening, he'll take it. And Lillian? My voice cracked despite my effort to steady it. She doesn't know. She can't know. She thinks she married security. Edward finished. That's how he does it. But first we gather evidence. Then we protect your assets. Your daughter's heart can heal, Preston. But if your savings are stolen, there's no getting them back. I stared at the screen behind me. The damning searches, the pages Philip had opened on my machine, his footprints across my life. My rage hardened into something sharper. He brought an appraiser here yesterday, I said. Walked my property. He used my own computer to study the process. That's his standard procedure. Edward's voice flattened. No hesitation. Professional appraisal, forged transfer documents. Corrupt notary. He runs it like a business. Tell me everything you've seen. So I did. The dinner conversation. The smug proposal at the restaurant. The man in the suit with a briefcase. The photographs of my foundation, my backyard. The browser history I'd uncovered. Classic pattern, Edward confirmed, grim as a judge. Preston, I'm clearing my schedule. I need you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. Bring everything, your deed, will, insurance policies, bank statements. Every document that proves ownership. Should I call the police? Not yet. His voice grew firm, commanding. We need airtight evidence first. Philip's sophisticated. He's beaten charges before by claiming the victims willingly signed documents, then later claimed memory loss, memory problems. The phrase twisted in my gut, cruel and strategic. That's how he saw me. Not as a father, not as a man, but as a mark, an aging, grieving widower with a mind ripe for discrediting. One more thing, Edward added, his voice low and steady. Be careful. If he suspects you know his true nature, he might accelerate his timeline. And then, Preston, you'll be in real danger. The line went silent, and I found myself staring at the black reflection in my study window. My own face looked back at me, lined with age but lit with something I hadn't felt in years, resolve. Philip wasn't just greedy. He was a predator, a professional criminal, and he had chosen me as his next victim. But he had made one fatal mistake. I hadn't survived 40 years in engineering by buckling under pressure. Problems had solutions, and tomorrow with Edward at my side, I would start building the case that would tear Philip Green's empire of lies apart. I reached for my safe, fingers spinning the familiar combination. From the kitchen, Philip's laughter floated through the walls, smug and unknowing, and for the first time since that cursed dinner, I smiled. Let him laugh. Let him think he was winning. His time was running out. The words Edward had spoken, fraud, predator, professional criminal, had reshaped my view of Philip in an instant. He wasn't just an opportunist with greedy ideas. He was a practiced thief wearing the mask of family. By the time I pulled into my driveway, his car was already parked there, shining smugly beneath the streetlight. Through the kitchen window, I caught sight of him and Lillian at the table, their heads bent together, laughter punctuating the clink of silverware. To any passer-by, it would have looked like domestic bliss. To me it was theater, a grotesque performance staged in my house, fueled by lies I now understood all too clearly. I forced normalcy into my voice as I stepped through the front door, calling out the same casual greetings I'd given hundreds of times before. Philip answered from the kitchen, warm and easy, asking about my errands, his tone laced with practiced charm, the same voice that had demanded my home like it was nothing but another piece in his collection. My jaw tightened, but I walked calmly past, retreating to the one place still mine, the study. I locked the door and went straight to the portrait of Margaret, her kind eyes frozen forever in paint. Behind it, the safe waited. Our wedding anniversary. For 20 years that sequence of numbers had guarded the foundation of my life. With a click, the door opened, revealing the heartbeat of everything I had built. I laid the documents across my desk, spreading them with the precision of an engineer inspecting blueprints. The house deed, notarized, the paper now yellowed at the edges, but carrying a market value of nearly $400,000. My updated will, revised after Margaret's death, leaving everything to Lillian, insurance policies, bank and investment statements, representing decades of patient, disciplined saving. Every sheet of paper was another brick in the fortress of my life's work. And now I understood. These were the exact bricks Philip intended to dismantle. From the kitchen drifted the sound of plates being cleared. Normal sounds. Married couple sounds. The kind of sounds that used to make Margaret smile. Now they were sinister. A mask stretched over the reality of who Philip was. How many other men had sat exactly where I sat, realizing too late that they had invited a predator into their homes. I pulled out my leather journal, Margaret's last gift. Its pages had always been for my ideas, my careful thoughts. Tonight it became my battlefield. I recorded every moment, every phrase, every suspicious exchange I had dismissed as harmless. Preston, don't you get tired rattling around in this big house alone? Have you thought about downsizing? Lillian worries about you living here by yourself. At the time, they had sounded like concern. Now I saw them clearly. Reconnaissance questions, probes into my vulnerabilities, manipulations of my daughter's compassion to weaken my defenses. I reached deeper into the safe and found Margaret's jewelry box. Her engagement ring sparkled faintly in the lamplight. 2 carats, nearly identical to the one Philip had given Lillian. My stomach turned. Where had a supposed business consultant, with a murky career, pulled together $20,000 for a ring? A question with answers I didn't want to imagine. I photographed everything. Deeds, wills, statements, jewelry, and saved copies in multiple locations. Redundancy and backup systems. That was how you protected a design from failure. And now I was applying the same principle to my life. If Philip ever managed to get his hands on the originals, he would still fail. I would not. The shrill buzz of my phone broke the silence. Lillian's name lit the screen. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself. "Dad, are you okay? You've been so quiet since the dinner." Her voice trembled with genuine worry, the kind Philip surely stoked at every chance. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said evenly. "Just tired." She exhaled, relief softening her tone. "Philip thinks maybe we should all sit down. Talk things through. Clear the air." Clear the air. I almost laughed. What Philip really meant was present his polished trap, documents, appraisals, legal jargon, to convince me to hand him my legacy willingly. "Maybe tomorrow," I said gently. "Let me get some rest first." After hanging up, I turned back to my preparations. I changed every banking PIN, added fraud alerts to my accounts, and scheduled meetings with my insurance company and financial advisor. Edward had told me about 3 other families Philip had destroyed. Fathers just like me. Men who had trusted too much, loved too deeply, and underestimated the wolf wearing sheep's clothing. But I wasn't going to be the fourth.
40 years in engineering had taught me to analyze threats, to design around failure, to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Tonight, I would not sleep. Tonight, I built my defenses. By 9:30, the documents were back in the safe, locked and sealed. Upstairs, Philip and Lillian were probably settling in, whispering about their future, dreaming of a life funded by my labor. Let them dream. Tomorrow would be the first crack in their fantasy. I had one more call to make. The fraud prevention hotline picked up after 2 rings. First National Security Department. "This is Jennifer. This is Preston Weaver," I said firmly. "Account number 447291. I need to report suspicious activity involving my son-in-law." As I laid out the story, my voice steady, I heard laughter ripple down from upstairs. Philip's laugh, smug and careless. And for the second time in as many nights, I smiled. Let him laugh, let him enjoy the illusion of control, because tomorrow, the ground beneath his feet would start to crack. By dawn, I was at my computer with coffee, Edward's list of victims spread before me like a roadmap. I had 48 hours before we met law enforcement, and every hour would count. Philip still slept upstairs with my daughter, oblivious to the storm rising beneath him. I began with the first name. Eleanor Martinez, 73, Phoenix. Her daughter had married Philip in October. By Christmas, Eleanor's home had been sold to a cash buyer, below market value, forged signatures attached. I found her through her daughter's Facebook profile. The contrast between her recent photos, cramped apartment walls, bitter posts about rising rent, and older ones of sprawling gardens and family barbecues, told the story as clearly as any legal file. Philip's own online presence was a mask, just as convincing as the one he wore in my kitchen. Professional headshots, conference photos, glowing testimonials. But dates betrayed him. He claimed to be in Denver consulting while simultaneously honeymooning in Phoenix. I screenshotted everything, building a dossier piece by piece. By the second day, Edward had connected me to survivors directly. Eleanor's voice trembled as she relived the betrayal. "He was so kind at first," she said. "He worried about me living alone, offered to handle my finances so I could rest. Then one morning, he showed up with a moving truck and eviction papers, told me the house had already been sold for my own good." Robert Chen in Denver told a similar story. 6 weeks after the wedding, he shoved papers in my face, said I'd signed power of attorney. The signature looked like mine, but I never touched a pen. His words carried the same dazed disbelief, the same wound that never healed. Every conversation painted the same picture: professional forgers, corrupt notaries, and legal tricks designed to erode confidence until victims doubted their own memories. Families divided, children siding with the charming spouse over the aging parent, trust corroded beyond repair. By day 3, I had constructed the full map. The same pattern every time. Identify a target, court their struggling child, marry within 6 months, raise housing concerns, then bring in appraisers, fake documents, and the final reveal: the elderly parent had agreed to sell their home. But the most damning piece of evidence wasn't a testimony or a deed. It came from a deleted social media post. I clawed back through Google's cache. A post Philip thought was gone forever.
The discovery gutted me. My morning routine, my phone calls with Edward, even the quiet evenings when I thought I was alone, all of it had been catalogued, recorded, dissected by Philip. He had been building a file on me like I was some mark on a chessboard. And then came the part that turned my stomach. File 38. The grainy footage showed him in my living room, strolling around while I was at the grocery store, speaking on his phone, as if the house already belonged to him. The old man is completely trusting. Philip's voice carried out of my computer speakers with casual confidence. By the end of the month, the house will be ours. The documents are almost ready. I froze, blood rushing in my ears, my heart slamming against my ribs. This wasn't suspicion anymore, this was confession. The recording rolled on, revealing the other player in his scheme. Richard, Are you sure the notary stamps will pass inspection? Philip asked, his tone sharp, businesslike. Richard, a name, an accomplice. Then came the reply, another man's voice faint through the speaker. These elderly targets sometimes surprise you, but he's exactly like the others. Proud, independent, but ultimately naive. Philip laughed then, a cruel, self-satisfied sound that I will never forget. He actually paid 15 grand for our wedding, made it so easy to look legitimate. My hands clenched into fists. Rage blurred my vision. My wife's memory, my daughter's trust, my own generosity, all of it twisted into leverage for this parasite. And then the dagger. And the daughter, Philip chuckled. Lillian will never believe her precious daddy over her loving husband. She's the perfect cover. Perfect cover. That line scorched through me like fire. My daughter wasn't his wife. She was his alibi, his shield, his camouflage. I copied the file instantly, creating backups on flash drives, hard drives, and cloud storage. An engineer learns one lesson above all: redundancy. If Philip wanted war, then I would build my defenses thicker than steel. Further recordings filled in the missing pieces. Richard Fox, the so-called notary, was the key. He'd validated forged deeds and powers of attorney for Philip's previous victims, papering over crime with official seals. Phone calls between the two men revealed the entire operation step by step. Target the vulnerable, court their adult children, rush the marriage, create urgency about housing, forge the paperwork, move in, destroy the family from within. A machine of deception, perfected over years. But this time, the machine had recorded itself. I sat back in my chair, staring at my own reflection in the darkened screen. That hidden camera was supposed to be Philip's edge, his secret weapon. Instead, his arrogance had handed me the sword I needed to cut him down. I closed the laptop, my pulse slowing, a grim calm settling in. This wasn't defense anymore, it was offense. I picked up the phone and dialed. Detective Sarah Miller. Edward had said she was the one to call when facing predators like Philip, a fraud specialist, a hunter of men who preyed on families. When she agreed to meet me the same day, and when her tone changed the moment I mentioned Philip Green, I knew I had found my ally. The next morning, I stood before the downtown police station, my briefcase heavy in my hand. 3 weeks of work lived inside that leather case: organized folders, photographs, transcripts, screenshots, testimony, and most importantly, Philip's own voice damning him beyond redemption. Walking through those glass doors, I felt the weight of 40 years of engineering discipline in every step. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a builder laying the foundation of justice. Mr. Weaver, a woman's voice. Detective Miller. She was in her 40s, sharp eyes, her badge clipped neatly to her jacket. Her handshake was firm, her presence professional, yet behind it I caught something else. Curiosity, maybe even respect. She led me into a gray interview room with metal chairs and a table that had seen too many ruined lives. "I'll admit," she said, motioning for me to sit, "I wasn't expecting much when you called. Most elderly fraud victims come in with stories but no proof." I set the briefcase on the table with deliberate care, clicked open the latches, met her gaze. "Detective, I spent 40 years as an engineer. I believe in documentation." One by one she examined the files, social media screenshots, victim statements, timelines, bank records, forged documents, cross-referenced with originals, and then finally the audio recordings. Philip's voice, clear as day, laughing about how easily he could take everything from me. By the 20-minute mark, she was leaning forward, eyebrows raised, fingers tapping rapidly on her keyboard. "This," she finally said, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "is the most comprehensive case file I've seen in 15 years. She looked at me differently now, not as a frail old man but as someone who had done the impossible, cornered a predator in his own trap. Her next words stunned me. "We've been tracking Philip Green across 3 states for 8 months. He's wanted in connection with at least 12 fraud cases." 12. My voice cracked with disbelief.
I had suspected 2, maybe 3, but 12. 12 families torn apart, 12 homes stolen, 12 parents like me, sitting alone in their studies, wondering how they could have been so blind. My fists tightened around the edge of the table. How was that even possible?
Possible? I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. Detective Miller's expression was steady, her tone carrying the weary edge of someone who had said these words too many times. He's very good at what he does. Most victims are too embarrassed to admit they were deceived, and without evidence, prosecutions collapse. He preys on shame as much as finances. She turned her monitor toward me. A map filled the screen, red pins clustered across Illinois, Colorado, Arizona. Each pin was not just a dot. It was a family destroyed, a life hollowed out. Well, I said, squaring my shoulders, I'm not embarrassed. And this time, he picked the wrong house. You have the evidence now. Something shifted in her. Routine intake became focused strategy. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Weaver, you could be the key to stopping him once and for all. But it requires your cooperation in a sting operation. My pulse jumped. What kind of cooperation? You act normally, she said. Let him proceed. We'll capture every move, every word on tape. We need him attempting the fraud in real time. Your recordings are excellent, but they show intent. To secure conviction, we need him caught mid-crime. You want me to let him think he's winning? The idea felt absurd, surreal, sitting across from a woman who spoke about my nightmare, as though it were a chess match. Yes, she said firmly, until he damns himself with his own actions. It's the only way we make this airtight in court. What about my safety? I asked, my voice low. She reached into her jacket and placed a small device in my hand, no bigger than a key fob. One press brings immediate backup. Officers will be positioned around your house. Response time under 30 seconds. I turned the device over in my palm. Its weight heavier than it looked. A panic button. A lifeline. After weeks of playing detective, I was now becoming bait. When? Based on your recordings, Philip mentioned the end of the month. That gives us 1 week to prepare. She was already filing my evidence into police folders. Every page transformed into ammunition for war. We'll install surveillance tomorrow. Hidden cameras, directional microphones, secure comms. By tomorrow evening we'll be ready. I thought of Lillian, my daughter, blinded by charm, chained to a man who saw her as cover, nothing more. She doesn't know, I whispered. Miller's face softened for the first time. Family is always the hardest part, but stopping him now protects her, and everyone else. I remembered Eleanor Martinez crying over her lost home. Robert Chen, his life wrecked by forged signatures he never wrote. 12 families broken. What do you need from me? You've already given us a perfect start, she said, rising to shake my hand. Tomorrow morning, 8 sharp, my team will arrive. By tomorrow night, Philip Green will be walking straight into our net. As she walked me out, she said one more thing, her tone almost admiring. In 15 years of police work, I've never seen a victim turn the tables like this. Philip Green has no idea what's coming. I drove home in silence. The house felt heavier than ever, the air thick with anticipation. Within 24 hours, it would transform into a stage, every word and gesture captured, every corner wired. I had 1 night to prepare for the role of my life. The trusting father, the confused old man, the easy mark. When morning came, I was already waiting by the window with black coffee. When 3 unmarked vans rolled up my driveway, Detective Miller climbed out, followed by specialists hauling cases of equipment. Mr. Weaver, she called, brisk and steady. We'll be finished in 4 hours. Then we rehearse. I stood aside as they moved through my home with surgical precision. Cameras no larger than coins disappeared into picture frames and bookshelves. Directional microphones vanished beneath vents and lamps. Wires thinner than hair threaded invisibly along baseboards. My living room became a recording studio, a trap built from silence and patience. One technician adjusted a lens behind Margaret's old portrait,
and explained, "These record in ultra-high definition. The audio filters background noise. Unless Philip comes in with a magnifying glass, he won't notice." Detective Miller handed me an earpiece no larger than a hearing aid. "Direct line to our monitoring station. You'll hear me if you need guidance. We'll be across the street in a mobile command unit, back up 2 blocks away. You won't be alone for a second." By noon they had finished. Miller placed a tablet in my hands, showing multiple camera angles of my own living room. Seeing my familiar furniture framed like evidence unnerved me. My home was no longer mine. It was a stage. "Now we rehearse," Miller said. For 2 hours I sparred with detectives role-playing Philip. Each time they pressed me, I practiced natural resistance, my responses designed to draw out explanation. "Don't try to trap him yourself," Miller warned. "Let him reveal his greed. Your safety first." By 3 o'clock, the systems were tested. My earpiece buzzed. "Testing, Mr. Weaver. Can you hear me?" Crystal clear. Outside, I saw neighbors I'd known for decades, or rather, officers disguised as neighbors, settling into their roles. Cecil Brown waved from his yard, his subtle nod telling me he now shared his home with armed men. At 5, I heard the crunch of tires in my driveway. My throat went dry. Philip's car gleamed in the fading light, and beside him stepped a man in a dark suit with a leather briefcase. Both wore confident smiles, the same masks I now knew to be predatory grins. My earpiece vibrated. Miller's voice whispered into my ear, calm but charged. "Showtime, Mr. Weaver. We're with you." I touched the panic button in my pocket, a silent reassurance, then turned toward the door as the bell rang. I opened it with practiced calm. "Philip," I said evenly, my eyes flicking to the stranger beside him. "And you've brought a friend." Philip's grin was radiant, his enthusiasm convincing to anyone who didn't already know the truth. To me, it looked grotesque, a predator unaware that the cage had already closed. The flashing red and blue lights washed across my quiet street like some surreal nightmare turned victory parade. Detective Miller's words echoed in my head. Full cooperation might cut their sentence from 15 years down to 5. It didn't matter. Watching Philip and his accomplice shoved into the back of patrol cars, wrists chained, faces pale, was all the justice I needed in that moment. Neighbors huddled at the end of their driveways, whispers rising into the night as media vans screeched to a halt, camera lights blinding against the shadows. The story had spread fast. An elderly man had cracked open a criminal fraud ring that spanned states. A reporter leaned over the police tape, notebook in hand. "Mr. Weaver, how did you uncover this scheme?" I met his gaze steadily, my voice calm despite the adrenaline. 40 years as an engineer teaches you one thing: when something doesn't make sense, you don't let it slide. You investigate until it does. Detective Miller reappeared, nodding at me with something between gratitude and admiration. "Outstanding work, Mr. Weaver. This arrest ties together cases in 5 states. You probably saved dozens of families from losing their homes." Her words sank in slowly, almost heavier than the betrayal itself. What had started as my fight to protect a single house had grown into something far larger. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Trial. About 8 weeks from now. With your recordings, your documentation, and the testimony we've gathered, conviction is nearly guaranteed." She pressed her card into my hand. "The DA will want to speak with you soon. But make no mistake, you just took down a career predator." I looked back at my house, the home I had built, defended, nearly lost. The cameras would come down tomorrow. The locks would no longer need replacing. But I knew I was changed forever. Philip's arrogance had awakened something I thought I'd left in retirement. The sharp, relentless instincts of a man who refuses to be prey. "Thank you, detective," I said quietly, "for believing an old man's suspicions were worth your time." She smiled, genuine, respectful. "You didn't just protect yourself, Mr. Weaver. You stopped a man who was dismantling families across this country. You should be proud." 8 weeks later, I found myself climbing the granite steps of the Cook County Courthouse, briefcase in hand, crisp May sunlight warming my shoulders. Inside that case lay the evidence of Philip Green's empire of lies, the evidence that would dismantle him piece by piece. Detective Miller met me by the entrance, her eyes sharp but kind. "Ready for the final chapter, Mr. Weaver?" "More than ready," I told her. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. At the defendant's table, Philip sat in an orange jumpsuit, his once smug grin replaced by a hollow stare. The predator was finally caged. Richard Fox, his partner, had already pled guilty, bartering his soul for a lighter sentence, but my eyes found only one face. My daughter's. Lillian sat in the front row, her posture straighter than I'd seen in months. Within a week of Philip's arrest, she'd divorced him, shed his name, and reclaimed her dignity. When our eyes met, she smiled. The same warm, childlike smile I remembered from years ago. For a brief moment, I wasn't in a courtroom. I was simply a father, proud of the strength his daughter had rediscovered. Judge Clark called for order, and the case unfolded with mechanical precision. The prosecutor outlined Philip's crimes like an engineer laying out schematics. 12 victims across 5 states, millions stolen, each family broken by the same manipulative playbook: courtship, trust, forged documents, eviction. This was not opportunism, the prosecutor declared. This was predation. The defense tried its weak counterpunch. My client made mistakes, yes, but he was pressured, manipulated by others. I nearly laughed out loud. Even with prison looming, Philip couldn't take responsibility. Victims testified one by one, tears in their voices, pain etched into every word. A woman from Phoenix who lost her home of 40 years. A man from Denver who suffered a heart attack after eviction. Each story a carbon copy, each life shattered by Philip's script. And then came the recordings. Philip's own voice, smooth and cruel. "The old man is completely trusting. By the end of the month, the house will be ours." His words filled the silent courtroom like poison. His head dropped. There was no defense against the sound of your own predation. "Mr. Weaver," the prosecutor called, "please take the stand." My steps were steady as I walked forward. I spoke clearly, recounting March 25th, the forged documents, his threats of nursing home abandonment, his attempt to force me from my own home. The defense tried one last pathetic jab. "Mr. Weaver, isn't it possible this was just a misunderstanding within the family?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with the lawyer, counselor. "Systematic criminals who target elderly homeowners across multiple states don't create misunderstandings. They create federal cases." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Even Judge Clark cracked a smile. After 2 days of testimony, the jury took less than 3 hours. The verdict was swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Judge Clark's sentence landed like a hammer. "Mr. Green, you have systematically preyed upon the elderly, exploiting trust and destroying families. This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, with full restitution to your victims." Philip's legs buckled. The predator who once demanded my house stood trembling, shackled, broken. Richard Fox earned 5 years with parole, his cooperation noted but not absolved. On the courthouse steps, Lillian wrapped her arms around me. "Dad, I'm proud of you. You didn't just save yourself, you saved all those families." Tears pricked my eyes, but I held her tighter. "Sweetheart, you loved a man who deceived professionals for years. That doesn't show weakness. It shows your heart, and that heart is worth protecting." Detective Miller joined us. "Mr. Weaver, this case will be taught in police academies. You proved that age brings wisdom, not weakness." As Lillian and I drove home, she squeezed my hand gently. "What's next for you, Dad?" I thought about it. Lectures on elder fraud, helping others fight back, using the same mind that solved engineering problems to protect people instead of machines. "Whatever comes next," I said at last, "I know I can handle it." At 68 years old, I had learned that protecting family requires more than love. It requires strategy, preparation, and an iron will. My house was safe, my daughter was healing, and Philip Green would spend the next 12 years haunted by the old man who refused to be his victim.